here in New York is Ecuador's Foreign Minister, Ricardo Patiño, who took part in the Organization of American States meeting yesterday. Ecuador has offered to mediate between the United States and Venezuela. Ricardo Patiño, welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. Can you respond to the U.S. calling Venezuela an extraordinary national security threat?
Es un sinsentido. No tiene el más mínimo sentido pensar que Venezuela es una amenaza para los Estados Unidos.
No sense whatsoever to think that Venezuela constitutes a threat to the United States. If there's a country that is a threat in the Americas, it's the United States.
Invadido permanentemente gobiernos y sociedades en el
permanently invaded countries, societies in Latin America. It has created coup d'etats. It has invaded countries such as Grenada, the Dominican Republic, Panama, and it has
Venezuela no tiene la más mínima posibilidad material
the minimal material possibility to constitute a threat to the United States, nor does it wish to be in that position. We have no desire or possibility to be a threat to the United States. What we want is to live in peace and to ask the government of the United States to let Latin America live in peace and democracy as is happening at this time.
And can you tell us a little more about the offer of your government to mediate between the United States and Venezuela? ¿Nos puede hablar un poco de la oferta de su gobierno de negociar entre los Estados Unidos en este conflicto entre Estados Unidos y Venezuela?
Realmente es un pedido que ha hecho el gobierno de Venezuela.
It's really a request that the government of Venezuela has made that Ecuador, insofar as it is now President pro tem of CELAC, which is the Community of Latin American States, to coordinate with other forums in Latin America to give impetus to a dialogue with the United States. In a decision adopted by the Union of South American Nations last Saturday, which was a hard-hitting decision, or clear decision by the 12 South American countries, we rejected the executive order by the U.S. government, and we asked that it be lifted. But we also called for a dialogue, because we see that the solution is not violence. The solution is to be found in dialogue, and we want to make it perfectly clear that Venezuela is not alone, and that as it is not a threat to the United States, Ecuador is not a threat either, nor is Brazil a threat. And we ask the United States to respect the self-determination and sovereignty of the South American and Latin American peoples.
At a recent State Department briefing, the State Department spokesperson, Jen Psaki, surprised many by claiming, quote, as a matter of long-standing policy, the United States does not support political transitions by non-constitutional means. Your response?
Es solamente cuestión de revisar brevemente la historia.
It's just a question of briefly reviewing the history of what the United States foreign policy has been.
¿Qué pasó con Irak?
What happened with Iraq?
¿Qué pasó con Afganistán?
What has happened with Afghanistan? In the case of Iraq, there was a worldwide media show to show that there were weapons of mass destruction. The Bush administration at that time knew that they did not exist. They killed thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. And it's all been left in absolute impunity. They declared that Iraq constituted a threat to the United States, and after that, they invaded. That is why we are concerned about this definition. Now, they say it's just a formality, but it's very serious for a country and for its president to say that another country constitutes a threat. It's very serious because then one has to see what the consequences of such a declaration will be. Plus, when they say that they don't promote coup d'etats and violent actions against our countries, well, all of the history of the 20th century shows just the opposite. Anytime they've not liked the government, they have tried to figure out how to overthrow it, and they've done it on many occasions. So we regret that we cannot agree with these declarations.
At the same time, though, that the United States is being so aggressive toward Venezuela, President Obama announced recently the normalization the beginning of normalization of relations with Cuba. I'm wondering your reaction to that and what the impact has been in Latin America.
Nosotros veíamos con mucha alegría esto.
We looked on this with great happiness. We consider this to be a triumph of the struggle and dignity of the people and government of Cuba after putting up for more than 50 years with a totally illegal embargo that has had a negative impact on the lives of Cubans for so long. We saw this as a new vision of the United States, a more respectful relationship with the region. But unfortunately, this happiness just lasted a few weeks because all of a sudden there's an unnecessary conflict which is brought about in a unilateral manner by the government of the United States against Venezuela. We had hoped that the Summit of the Americas, which is coming in just a few days, that's going to be April 10th and 11th in Panama, was going to be, as I put it, the Summit of Happiness, because the first time in the 20 years of the Summits of the Americas that Cuba was going to enter. It was going to no longer be excluded. But we lament that just a few days before that summit, we have to put up with an aggression, because it is clearly an aggression by the government of the United States against our sister Republic of Venezuela. And we call on and urge the government of the United States for us to work out problems in a friendly way through dialogue. And I would hope that before the summit it will be possible to have the two governments, the United States and Venezuela, to engage in a dialogue such that the summit not reflect these issues of tension, but rather it should reflect the happiness because Cuba has now been brought into the summit.
What role play, do you think, when it comes to Venezuela, the way the U.S. deals with Venezuela?
Well, there are some other countries which in recent times have been invaded as a result of having control of oil, or because of a concern about controlling oil. We see this in Iraq and in Libya. Let us not forget there is information that is not always as widely disseminated as it could be. Venezuela has the largest quantity of proven reserves, oil reserves, anywhere worldwide. So unfortunately, this may be a reason for seeking to control that oil production and those oil reserves on the part of certain interests in the United States.
I want to turn to another topic, the situation of Julian Assange. He has been residing in your country's embassy in London, and recently Swedish authorities offered to come to London to interview him. I'm wondering, this is a significant development, given the amount of time he has spent basically in isolation there in your embassy. Your comment and your reaction to the latest announcement of the Swedish authorities.
Bueno, nosotros vemos con simpatía.
We view favorably, and we are pleased to see the Swedish prosecutors say that they now want to take the statements from Julian Assange at our embassy. But at the same time, we are concerned that 1,000 days have gone by. 1,000 days with Julian Assange confined in our embassy before they say that they're going to do what they should have done from day one, which was offered by the government of Ecuador. We told the Swedish prosecutorial authorities, the Swedish government, that we were open and willing to facilitate conditions so that they could take a statement. And that would be, that's the first action that the Swedish justice system should have in order to respond to the complaint by two persons who've lodged a complaint against Julian Assange. But the thing is, 4.5 years have elapsed since the complaint was lodged. 2 years where he had electronic apparatus attached to him in London, and then 2 more years in our embassy. And now the prosecutor says that she's going to take the statement because the statute of limitations might run on the crime. The question is, why did they let so much time go by? And who is going to pay Julian Assange compensation for 1,000 days of confinement? I reiterate, we are pleased with this decision because it is recognition that they could have done it. The problem is, and they'll have to explain, including to the Swedish prosecutors will have to explain to, among others, human rights bodies in Europe why they didn't so before, because the violation of Julian Assange's human rights, having had him confined 1,000 days in our embassy, and then recognizing that, yes, they should have done this earlier. Well, somebody's going to have to give an explanation.
Can you talk about the original decision that your country, Ecuador, made to allow Julian Assange to stay in the embassy, to grant him political asylum? And if he were able to leave the embassy, would he be able to come to Ecuador to live?
¿Él podría pasar a Ecuador para vivir en Ecuador?
Sí, eso lo podría hacer. Nosotros estamos
Yes, he could do that.
planteado, digamos, y hemos aceptado
we have said,
que él pidió,
and we have accepted his request for asylum for one fundamental reason. He said that he was the target of political persecution. And we were able to verify that that was the case, and that's why we granted him asylum. Because of this real fact that actually was happening, but also because we countries have the right to grant asylum, because asylum is established in fundamental human rights instruments. All the international treaties, including an asylum agreement that Ecuador has as a Latin American country. After we gave him asylum, we immediately asked the United Kingdom to offer safe conduct so as to be able to take him to our country, or whatever country he would like, where he would feel safe. So, once the UK offers the safe conduct, we'll take Julian Assange to our country or wherever he would like to go where he feels safe. In principle, we thought that it could be Ecuador.
Have you had any discussions with the United States? Julian Assange has repeatedly said his concern is not with Sweden, that he would be willing to go to Sweden, but that he has never gotten assurances that Sweden will not extradite him to the United States. And it's there that he's concerned. We just spoke with his lawyer, Michael Ratner, who said there is an open investigation around WikiLeaks and charges of espionage and other such issues around the release of documents.
Well, when we were offering the safe conduct, or I should say rather asylum, before giving Julian Assange asylum, we consulted with the United States and we asked whether any investigation had been opened. The answer was evasive. They simply told us that the matter regarding Julian Assange's request for asylum in Ecuador is a matter that has to do strictly with your country, and in any event with a bilateral relationship with the United Kingdom, but that we have nothing to say. In other words, they didn't give us any answer, but we do know, everybody knows it, because this is practically public information, even though it is under seal, that there is a proceeding that has been opened in the United States against Julian Assange. And considering how trials and investigations unfold in the United States against persons who are accused, in particular, in proceedings in matters such as this. Well, of course, we'd be concerned about the outcome of the investigation into Julian Assange, and it was also clear that there was political persecution, which is why we gave him asylum, and that is why we maintain our position with respect to Julian Assange. We believe that he is someone who has done great benefit to humankind in terms of revealing crimes that have occurred and that shouldn't be kept hidden. This is the contribution that he has made. I'm not saying that we fully agree with everything that Julian Assange does. That's different. When you grant asylum, you don't turn the person into a saint. But we do think that the contribution in terms of the information that has been provided to the world has helped to open the eyes. Plus, he wasn't the one who gave the information. It was communication media. And no proceeding has been pursued against them, just against Julian Assange, who they consider to be a dangerous man.
We are speaking with Ricardo Patiño, the Foreign Minister of Ecuador, here in our studios in New York. When we come back, we'll talk to him about Ecuador's case against Chevron Texaco for what it has done in Ecuador. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a moment. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guest is Ricardo Patiño, the Foreign Minister of Ecuador. Juan?
Well, we'd like to turn to some issues within your own country, and we'd like to talk about the Chevron case. But first, I wanted to ask you about the proposal of your government to make a constitutional amendment declaring the communications media a public service. There are some critics who are claiming that that's an attempt on the part of President Correa of seeking to muzzle press liberty, so freedom of the press. I'm wondering your reaction to the critics and why you felt you needed an amendment to the Constitution since you already have a law that pretty much says the same thing.
Bueno, en el caso del Ecuador,
well, in the case of Ecuador, we have had an experience of major monopolization of the media for a long time. 6 families own the media outlets in Ecuador. They own television, the print media, radio, and they have controlled communication, unfortunately, as well. They have biased communication considerably, and they have brought together the interests of the media, the bankers, and the large companies. We believe that citizens' right to be adequately informed, that there be democracy in media ownership, is fundamental. And that is why we believe that communication should be considered a public service. It's not like selling ties or selling a cup or selling coffee. We're talking about other kinds of services, and this service should be so considered. Indeed, it's unfortunate or regrettable, but after so much discussion of this in Ecuador, and after it being proposed that communication should be so considered, the reaction has always been negative. Whereas in the United States, it's considered it could be a public service. Well, some who think that only in the United States is correct in terms of policies and rights, well, they've hushed up. But it's unthinkable. We citizens have the right to freedom of expression. Everyone, not just a few. But us citizens also have the right to receive accurate information that has been verified. And citizens, including politicians or members of the government, we also have the right to honor. All of these elements constitute the thinking in our government. And some people try to criticize this. Why? Because what we do now, and this did not happen before, is that we respond to the distortions or the omissions that many large television networks commit in Ecuador. And that's not fair. When they exercise their freedom of expression, we say they have the right, even if they lie. But we also have the right to refute those things that are said, and they don't like that. And so they say that in Ecuador we're limiting freedom of expression. The best way to solve this is if anyone has any doubt, we'll invite them to go to Ecuador for a day or 2 days, and then you'll have no doubt about it in terms of how there is full exercise of freedom of expression in our country.
Speaking of constitutional amendments, thousands of people protested in the streets of Quito yesterday and at least 12 other cities. They were protesting against the government. They were holding signs that said things like, "We want democracy," and "Say no to re-election." Demonstrators rallied in part to oppose constitutional changes that would allow indefinite re-election of the president and other officials. Your response?
The
decision to re-elect a citizen as president of the Republic or as mayor or legislator is up to the people of Ecuador. The people of Ecuador can decide whether they think a president has done a good job, that he served 1 term, 2 terms. That's a decision of the Ecuadorian people, just as that's a decision in many countries of the world. In Europe, sometimes the prime minister is there for 15 or 20 or 30 years. During the time, the people are willing to elect them. In our country, we have a right to have that as well. And unfortunately, there are some people who say, because they fear the impetus, the great impetus that the citizen revolution has achieved, and the great sympathy that people have for our president, which is based on the performance of a truly popular government, but it is also based on the validity of the elections that have happened. President Correa has won 3 elections. He's not been put in by the military or by the CIA. No, it's been the people of Ecuador voting for him. So we know that citizens have the right to vote or to not vote for a given citizen. If they don't like the work of President Correa, then they're going to vote for someone else. So what is the fear of the Ecuadorian people having the right to re-elect someone? To re-elect the president or mayor or legislator as they please, as they see fit.
I wanted to ask about the Chevron case. Earlier this month, an arbitration panel in The Hague ruled in favor of your government against Chevron in one of the greatest calamities, environmental calamities in modern times. Even though a U.S. court ruled against you. I wanted your reaction, and also if you could talk to people here who don't really know much about this disaster, what it has meant for your country.
Brevemente.
Briefly, Texaco was operating in Ecuador for about 30 years, from about 1960 to 1990, leaving an incredible ecological disaster. And it wasn't an accident. One must distinguish that, for in the case of British Petroleum, that was an accident, and in many other cases, a tanker that had an accident and the oil was spilled. No. Here we're talking about 30 years of oil operations. Now, having the adequate and sufficient techniques for processing the waste matter and impeding it from going directly into the rivers, regrettably in the case of Ecuador, Texaco dumped the oil production waste directly into the rivers and the jungle. They devastated a huge area of the Ecuadorian Amazon. So I want to draw that distinction. It's not an accident. It is, regrettably, a decision that was made so as to get Texaco to have higher earnings, destroying our Amazon. Now, if the waste had been processed, it would have cost some, and they wouldn't have earned more, but they would have protected the Amazon. Now, that is at the origin of all this. Now, a few days ago, I think it was March 11th, the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague took an important decision which is in keeping with the positions put forth by the government of Ecuador, which is to say that the citizens who brought a claim, well, I want to make a clarification. The government of Ecuador has not brought a claim against Chevron Texaco. It's been the citizens who've been impacted, those who saw their cows and even their loved ones die, those whose water sources have been destroyed. Those persons are the plaintiffs in the case against Chevron Texaco. Now, the tribunal has decided that that claim is a valid one, because Chevron's argument is that the communities of the Amazon didn't have a right to bring such a lawsuit, because at some point officials of the Ecuadorian government gave a release to Chevron Texaco from their responsibility as polluter. But that's something that was done by Ecuadorian officials irresponsibly in 1998. But the citizens didn't have to be impeded from bringing such a lawsuit, and it's a very good step. It's very good news that now the tribunal at The Hague has decided that those citizens did have a right to bring such a lawsuit. There's not yet a final ruling, because Chevron has some other observations and claims against the Ecuadorian state, but this first step is important, because had they decided that the citizens didn't have a right to bring the lawsuit, then what we might expect afterwards would be an annulment of Ecuador's case. And this is an important first step.
What happens on April 20th?
¿Qué es lo que va a pasar el día 20 de abril?
On
April 20th, deliberations begin by the tribunal with the participation of Ecuador's attorneys and Chevron's attorneys. to continue addressing the matter, because there are some other claims that Chevron has against Ecuador to prevent or so that they not have to pay on a judgment that's already been ratified by all the courts in Ecuador. Chevron Texaco has been ordered to pay $9.5 billion for the destruction caused by Texaco in our country. And now they are bringing a counterclaim against Ecuador, trying not to pay for the waste, the destruction. And now what they're saying is that if they are somehow forced to pay the judgment, that they should be indemnified by the state. In other words, Ecuadorian taxpayers should pay Texaco and Chevron for the destruction caused. Well, this is inadmissible. It's like the birds firing at the shotguns, and we believe that the soundness of our arguments will enable the tribunals to recognize that the judgment handed down in Ecuador is legitimate, and that the company, Chevron Texaco, has an obligation to comply, to compensate not the Ecuadorian state. The Ecuadorian state hasn't brought a claim against Chevron, but rather the citizens of the Amazon, the residents of the Amazon, for the destruction that they suffered. So we are awaiting a fair decision from the tribunal, and we have had to undertake a major communication effort from the Ecuadorian state because the multi-million and ill-intentioned campaign brought by Chevron against our state has been on a huge scale. And we have had to work very hard to try to offset the campaign by Chevron against us.
We want to thank you very much for being with us. Ricardo Patiño is the Foreign Minister of Ecuador. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, we look at another oil company, another oil giant, ExxonMobil, and the deal that New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has made with them, and why so many people are protesting. Stay with us.